Hi, I'm Jennifer Campbell, creator and host of the Systemic Leadership Summit. Welcome to this session. And in this session, we will talk about regenerative leadership and what it takes to apply the logic of life to leadership and complex issues such as climate change. How do you improve sustainability practice, help global sustainable solutions succeed, and make the sustainability agenda more attractive? My guest for today will share her answers to these questions. She has dedicated her life and career to regenerative leadership, sustainability, and she's at the forefront of this work. And her name is Laura Storm. Laura is an international keynote speaker, author, advisor, and expert on regenerative leadership. And she has spent her entire career advising global leaders on sustainability and building impact and purpose-driven organizations and movements. All they have focused on are the global transformation to sustainability, and they include the Copenhagen Climate Council, I must say, the World Business Summit on Climate Change, Project Greenlight, and Sustainia. Laura is a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader, and in 2013, Laura was awarded the Global Green Biz World Changer Award. She's also been selected to join the World Economic Forum's expert network as an expert in sustainable development and climate change, and serves as an advisory board member on the WEF Shaping the Future of Urban Development and Services initiative. Under Laura's leadership, Sustainia became a global mega brand within sustainability with an outreach to more than 150 million people, a database of 4,000 sustainable solutions, multiple state-of-the-art publications, and a unique partner network. In 2018, she founded Regenerators, a collective of professionals coming together to aid the emergence of a new thriving paradigm built on regenerative principles. A world where products, services, and organizations leave more value than they take. Where our systems, structures, and mindsets provide the foundation for vibrant, invigorating, thriving societies and organizations. So the collective is there to help redesign a world where purpose, people, planet, and profit can thrive collectively by tapping into the wisdom of nature. Laura co-authored the book Regenerative Leadership in 2019. She holds a master's degree in political communication and leadership from Copenhagen Business School and has also studied at Westminster Business School in London. Laura lives in Copenhagen with her partner and her 2 children. And today she's here to have a conversation with me and with us all. So very warm welcome to you, Laura. Thank you so much for being here in the Systemic Leadership Summit.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you so much for taking this initiative. So thank you so much for all your brilliant work in this field.
Thank you. Thank you. And let's start with the climate change situation. It's been, particularly in the last few months, it's been really a thing, but it has been a thing for you from a very early age onwards. So could you share with us how that movement around climate change and the topic of sustainability started for you?
I think as a child, I was quite this introverted, slightly sensitive kid. And in the 80s, I grew up in the 80s. It was a big thing on the agenda, talking about pollution, acid rain, and the ozone layer. And I was quite scared about that. And I wanted to make a difference. And I also saw one day a documentary about how oil companies were destroying the Amazon. So I decided to do something about that, and with other kids campaigned for the Amazon and encouraged people to support money with money to buy up pieces of the rainforest. So
Yeah.
that's what we did. We bought up pieces of the rainforest. And I saw myself since I was a kid as someone who would then go on to work on site in the Amazon as an environmentalist. And I actually did that as soon as I finished high school. As in the end of my teenage years, I then went to the Ecuadorian part of the Amazon, and lived and worked there for some time, getting hands-on insight into what is actually going on ground, how devastating everything looks like once the oil companies then move on to the next plot of land that they then go on to destroy.
Yeah.
So what we did was protecting pristine rainforest, making sure it would never go in the hands of oil companies, but also to regenerate the land that they had already destroyed, by growing new and cultivating that soil. Also taking care of animals that snipers had hunted for, and stuff like that. So it was an
Yeah.
amazing time.
Yeah.
Also in some ways slightly disturbing. It's always disturbing seeing firsthand what is really going on in I would actually call it a war zone, because that's what
Mm-hmm.
it felt like once we were visiting those sites that had been in the hands of oil companies. But
Yeah.
I got slightly impatient, because although it was immensely important work that the organization I work for did there, immensely, hugely important, I can't understate that.
Mm-hmm.
I can't stress that enough. I felt that I was eager to see what I could do to change things on a more systemic level, and I wanted to understand the machine of corporations from the inside out. So that's why I studied business both in Copenhagen and London, to
Yeah.
understand that kind of logic, and also I started to work very closely with big corporations, mainly those that had an interest in sustainability. And as you said in the intro, that's when I started to start various organizations that had a different focus: climate change, sustainability, making sustainability fun and exciting. But also the first part of my work was focused on what can we do to get a legally binding agreement to tackle climate change,
Yeah.
and what we now refer to as climate breakdown, because that's a more accurate way of stating it, because
Yeah.
our delicate climate systems are indeed breaking down.
Yeah. So thank you for this this intro and starting this conversation from your first experiences onto the business side of things. And but before we go to that part, I just want to look at what are your lessons learned from that until the point where you went to business school,
Mm-hmm.
because I understand at some point there was a realization things were also disturbing, impatience came up. But
Mm-hmm.
what were your lessons learned exactly from that early onset of the introduction with climate change and sustainability for
That,
you?
I mean, and exactly what I think. This was on a micro level, but on it's the same that we see now with Greta Thunberg and the movement that she has mobilized. I'm by
Mm-hmm.
no means or no way a Greta Thunberg. She's done an amazing job in terms of mobilizing people. But what
Mm-hmm.
it did make me realize as a kid and as a young professional was that we actually do have the power to change things, to start
Yeah.
things, to make things happen.
Yeah.
That it does matter, and
Yeah.
that we do have the possibility of making a change. So I think that was kind of installed in me from a very young age, and
Yeah.
that is with me still,
Yeah.
um, as is
Yeah.
impatience. But
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
those two things goes together, I guess.
Yeah, sometimes it can be a driver or a fuel
Yeah, exactly.
for you to move forward. And it's so interesting because many people, when we face these really big global problems, we feel
Mm,
like whatever we do, we're not going to influence all these big shifts or these
yeah.
big searches for answers or solutions to the huge problems that we face. And what you're learning is it does make a difference. It
Hmm.
does and you also searched how, and you mentioned Greta Thunberg. I would love to also hear from you. What do you think about her way of conveying this message around climate change, and her activism
Mm,
at a young age, just like things started at a young age for you
mm,
also. So, what do you think of her
mm.
and the dynamics around her way of activism?
I think she's amazing.
Mm.
I know there's a lot of adults, which I think find very embarrassing, that are criticizing her for being too emotional or too angry. And I mean, when someone like her starts to have so much success in mobilizing what adults have tried for a very long time,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess there will be criticism. I think it's embarrassing, because I think she's an amazing young woman. Um, and what she has done for this movement is, I mean, you can only have praise for that. She has succeeded putting this very, very, very high on the agenda, and she has showed how many people actually supports a radical transformation of our societies.
Mm-hmm.
And to have um, cynical business leaders starting to criticize her, I think is you just have to kind of, I guess that's honestly, I think it's part of the dismantling of the patriarchy, the last kind of cries from that in a way, if I may
Yes.
say so.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's doing an amazing job. So I only have love for that.
Yeah, yeah. And what you're saying is that she's been able to put the climate
Mm,
situation high on the agenda, and she's been able to mobilize people. And so
mm,
the mobilizing means that there needs to be a shift in mindset, a shift in approach.
mm,
um, this is where I like to go back to you when you went to business school.
mm,
um, what did you discover in that area? Because changing mindsets, especially in the realm of leadership, that in the more traditional sense is shaped by people who have a particular mindset, who learned that in their business school. So, what
mm.
happened when you went to business school around this mindset change that was needed?
I mean, I guess what I did um, learn from my years at business school, and I must say I was never a full-time student because I always
Hmm.
did other stuff on the side.
Yeah.
And I was sometimes a pain to my teachers because I felt that um, they were not kind of, they did not have a reality check. I mean, and I still think that's the case, even though that has been many years now. I don't think they in any way teach young professionals, the leaders of tomorrow, to deal in the complex world of today. When we look around, we have climate change, resource scarcity. We soon have more plastic in our ocean than marine life. Our soils are depleted. We lose up to 1,200 species a day. We are in the midst of a sixth mass extinction. But still today, when you go into a business school, it's like it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I took a course on, I don't want to name shame, but one of the top elitist business school. I took an executive program a year and a half ago that was called something Leadership for the 21st Century. And
Yeah.
still, a 2-week program did not in any way address these issues.
Mm.
And it actually makes me mad. It
Mhm.
makes me furious that we are not teaching leaders of today what they need, the skills and tools they need to
Yeah.
navigate us through these stormy weathers onto the other side and start rebuilding a society that is nourishing and regenerative from the inside out. Um, so in many ways, that is one of the biggest lessons from business schools, that no, they do not teach leaders what they need to be taught. But of course, it has been beneficial for me to speak the language of business. It has been
Yeah.
beneficial for me to not be, I don't know if you can say there's a thing as a traditional environmentalist. I don't think you can. But I think it does make a difference that I'm used to navigating the waters of business and can speak that lingo and understand their everyday life. I mean, they do have shareholders and they do have a responsibility in that regard that they sometimes use as an excuse for not doing more.
Hmm.
So it has been valuable, of course, but I would love to transform business schools all over the world, actually.
Yeah. 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 And so you went on to the business realm yourself in the sense that you founded different organizations, and one of them is Sustainia.
Mm.
And so I'm just really curious, after discovering all this in a business school context and having a wish to reform, what exactly what was the purpose of Sustainia? Why did you initiate that?
So Sustainia was born out of a collective depression, I guess. And what I
Mm,
mean by that is that I and others, many other people, worked like crazy in the year up to what is called the COP15, which is the annual gathering of. I'm trying to speak in a non-technical language because it's important that everyone understands. But it's the gathering every year
yeah,
of all nations discussing climate policy.
yeah,
And COP15 were incredibly important because that was framed to be the successor of the Kyoto Protocol that everyone agreed on in 1997.
yeah.
So a lot of momentum was being built leading up to 2009. um Everyone had events around COP15. It was really, really kind of hyped to be this pivotal moment of our time, the
Yeah.
most important gathering of mankind. That kind of framing was around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the political negotiations were an utter failure. And maybe going back in hindsight, you can see that maybe we did need that, and we grew wiser from it, that
Mm-hmm.
we did learn a lot from that moment in time. But so many amazing events and partnership had been built leading up to COP15, and then everything just fell to the wayside. In my opinion, partly to big egos
Yeah.
and a disastrous process. Anyways, that was December 2009. And then I took a few months off. I wrote my thesis because I had kind of postponed that. So I interviewed CEOs from big corporations, big global corporations, on what they saw as the main challenges
Mm-hmm.
implementing a sustainability strategy and going on that transition. So that was an
Yeah.
interesting therapy in and of itself, working with organizations that are actually doing something, but also diving into what was their main challenges. And
Yeah.
some of the challenges may be the same, but things have also changed. That's a long time ago. But
Mm-hmm.
anyways, in those months of writing that, when I started to regain my energy, I saw a big need for remobilizing the important momentum that had been created leading up to COP15. We
Yeah.
we needed to collectively and globally revitalize that because so much value was there, and people wanted to do stuff. Corporations did wanted to take action. And I felt that part of the language, or part of the reason that COP15 had failed, was the language we had used. We had used a very, very technical, elitist
Mm.
language,
Yeah.
and we had only used scary images of polar bears on fire and drought, and the whole rhetoric around a sustainable movement or sustainable future was about taking fewer showers and wearing itchy kind of fabric. And it wasn't it wasn't sexy, it wasn't
No.
desirable. It was
No.
something like, oh, do we really need to do that? So it was one of those things that, but that's not even the truth, because I knew about the amazing solutions and companies out there that were doing amazing products, but the
Yeah.
world did not know about them. So
Right.
Sustainer was created, not by me alone, by the way, but I was just heading the organization and had the initial idea, and I wrote the first guide to Sustainia. It started with a guidebook of could the world look like in 10 years from now based on the technologies and solutions we have available today.
Yeah.
And that book started to create a lot of momentum, and then we built an organization around it. Then we got Schwarzenegger and Pharrell Williams and other people that are not really traditional, or at least not at that point in time, traditional people to be spokespeople for sustainability movements.
Yeah.
But we wanted to reach the broader masses, and we wanted to make sustainability fun and exciting. So we built a brand around it that was fun and exciting and attractive.
Yeah.
And then we did various fun and exciting, I hope, events that were very kind of celebratory of sustainable solutions. We did an annual Sustainia 100 that was celebrating the best solutions in 10 different categories. We did a big award ceremony that was framed like the Oscars of sustainability, where Schwarzenegger handed out the award, stuff like that. We tried to build a movement around it, and
Yeah.
they did succeed, kind of making those that are actually providing the alternative, the sustainable solutions and technologies, from everything to the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the houses we're building, how we get around, make those the heroes of the transition.
Yeah. 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 So what I understand from you, through Sustainia, you've been able to create a different narrative and a different presentation of the climate agenda, and also making it much more closer to home. I
Mm.
mean, really, if you show people images that are unattractive
Mm.
and may feel like an invasion of your day-to-day life and experience, and through Sustainia, you're able to switch that around
Mm.
and make it equally personal, but not much more of an addition to how can it add to our lives? How can it be
Mm.
more attractive?
Yeah, that a sustainable future
Yeah,
is much better for us.
yeah,
It's not just something we have to do, but it's actually about creating a better quality of life.
yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
that was very much missing, and it wasn't. I guess you could call it green lobbying, but it wasn't not the truth. It was very much the truth that we do have amazing solutions and technologies. And imagine a city where we only have electric cars, where you can actually breathe. Imagine homes where you can actually breathe, where you're not kind of locked into a concrete building in artificial daylight or artificial, um, yeah, lighting. Stuff like that, that it's actually much better for you and your health. And it's
Yeah,
about, yeah, more vibrancy and thrivability integrated into your life. It's not
yeah.
about letting things go that you are fond of.
And so, let me ask you, because because it's almost like we're in the realm of sustainability and climate change marketing.
Mm.
Um, and as you shared before when we were talking about Sustainia, is that you said you worked with not so typical celebrities for this particular area. You what I know is that you also did TED Talks, and you founded organizations. You held a top position in that,
Mm.
and could you share a bit more about what it takes to, uh, for the lack of a better word, quote unquote, sell climate change, sell in an economy that is so focused on profit? So yeah, what's your take on that?
Mm. Um, that it is the only viable direction. And what is, when we look around and when we state some of the facts of the current society, which was also the case when I started Sustainia back in 2012. as I said before, resource scarcity, climate change, pollution. We can't do successful business in a world like that, not for a long
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yeah.
So a transition is inevitable, because the
Yeah.
alternative is that the species Homo sapiens will go extinct as well. And when you present those facts in a very matter of fact way, business people totally gets that you can't do business in a world that does not exist,
Yeah.
and you can't produce things in a world that is very, very scarce of the resources they need. I mean, they get that. They are clever
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
But it's about, I think what we see now, I mean, we are very much in a phase of transition. It's a current it's a breakdown and breakthrough time we are living in right now. Some
Mm-hmm.
business leaders got this 20 years ago and are on the forefront.
Yeah.
Others are catching up but are getting this. And then yes, we do have a few business people that are only worried about the next quarter, that are only worried about here and now and want to make a short-term return. And that is still a challenge, and they are still blocking progress.
Yeah.
But I do think, I mean, just going back to what Greta Thunberg was able to mobilize um, in 2018-19 alone is a clear proof that we are so many people who are desperately longing for another way of living, and are worried
Mm-hmm.
about the future,
Yeah.
not just of ourselves but of our children as well. We just had an election in my country, Denmark, and it surprised all the parties that the main topic for voters was climate change and sustainability.
Mm.
They wanted a green agenda, and they wanted it now, and that was the parties that won. That was the parties with with a an ambitious green agenda.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think we see that in more and more countries. It's also, I mean, when I started Sustainia in 2012, it was still, it could still be difficult to persuade people that it was actually better quality and it
Yeah.
was improved quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
But but when we showed them I mean, because I'm a firm believer of the proof is in the is in the pudding, and when you
Mm-hmm.
show them, and when they get to feel and see and experience for themselves, they slowly start to see that this is not just angry environmentalists that are too worried and wants to take things away from you, but this is actually about getting something that is better in return. So those were the arguments that I was constantly putting out there, that this is about
Yeah.
improved quality of life, this is about better alternatives, this is about improving your health and your happiness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This is something that I so much recognize what you said earlier about when you approach this in a way where you say, I'm going to take away your comfort, I'm going to take away
Mm,
certain things in your life that you feel that are habitual to you, then that is a totally different approach
yeah.
than when you present it as
Mm,
this is actually the only viable way to move forward
yeah.
and to have a better quality of life.
Mm,
And I do recognize from discussions in society here in the Netherlands, where we're still on the edge, going back and forth of how much should we actually add to this climate change thing,
mm,
where there's a big divide actually between people who get it in the climate sense and others who feel like the quota that we now get, or the reduction of
mm,
um, nitrogen that we need to do, is way
mm.
too big compared to other countries and so forth. So there's also this sense of, are we contributing as much as other countries,
Mm,
less or more, because we're a small country? So there's a tendency to somehow put it into the don't take too much away from us box, because we're
mm,
already doing a lot.
mm,
Um, And it may not be enough when we look at what's needed.
No, but I think, I mean, that argument that, oh, well, it doesn't really matter what I do, right? Is an argument that I meet quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
There was a popular kind of meme that went viral that said, that had a straw, like a plastic straw lying on a
Mm-hmm.
beach,
Yeah.
saying something along the lines of, it doesn't really matter what I do, said 80 billion people.
Yeah.
And I do believe that, I mean, again, Greta Thunberg is a perfect example. She was just one Swedish schoolgirl, and look what kind of change she helped mobilize. It's about the small things. It's about seeing what does your friends do. And on social media, I see a lot of people starting to share how to replace your plastic shaver with one in metal, how to avoid the amount of plastic many use in their kitchen, and foil and stuff like that with bee wraps. And there are so many beautiful alternatives that does not make things more complicated. It's just about making the decision to change things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that is spreading. And it's, I mean, I have been in this field my entire life, and I do see massive change happening. And
Yeah.
suddenly you're not the crazy one. Suddenly it's starting in some circles to be the hip thing to do, to be trendy. But I would also say, in terms of the, because I have kind of researched quite deeply in the whole psychology around climate change, and there are great psychologists going deep into areas of climate change psychology, which is the understanding of what actually happens in our
Mm-hmm.
brains. And
Yeah.
what they say, um, to simplify what they say that climate change is such a big complex issue. It's simply too big an issue for our brains to comprehend. And when our brains meet such an issue, its default is to pretend it doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
um, you know about the different brain waves that our brain can be in. We can be in high beta when we are aroused and alert. That's kind of like the gear that since evolution we
Mm-hmm.
have. If we are faced with a threat or danger, we tune in, we zoom in, we have tunnel vision, we can only see that, so that all our energy goes to tackling that.
Yeah.
But climate change is not such an issue, because it just
No.
continues to be there.
Yeah.
So to protect ourselves, we go into the natural state of pretending it's not an issue. Because if we had to have this issue firsthand, every day, every second, we would be miserable.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about also having, I have had to learn myself to be compassionate to those people that are not doing anything, because they are just trying to protect themselves to imagine that it's not as bad as they say, because otherwise we would be very depressed. And climate depression is a thing
Yeah.
that is happening around the world right now.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for going there and for actually sharing a couple of different angles towards what happens to individuals, and that you approach them with compassion and understanding. Also, when people say, this is just way too big for me to comprehend, or are in complete denial altogether.
Mm.
Um, Especially people who say, "Oh, it doesn't really make a difference if we make
Mm.
this big change in society or our speed limits or things like
Mm.
that, and it only prevents 0.00001%
Mm.
in temperature change." I mean, and they go like, "Really? I'm sorry, but I
Mm.
don't see the point of this." And it has exactly to do with that. And so,
If I can add something, if I may, there's a
yeah.
lot of new social studies coming out, because this is something social scientists have been interested in for a very long time. What is the number you need to create the tipping point when the
Mm-hmm.
movement starts? So
Yeah.
analyzing a lot of different events, but Occupy Wall Street, the Arab Spring, Extinction Rebellion are some of the movements that are examples of that. And what social scientists have figured out, this is a bunch of different studies. They're not all saying the exact same number, but the number is varying between 10 and 13. 10 and 13% is the number of the people you need in a society to create the tipping point needed for a new movement to build.
Yeah.
And I think that number is something that I talk about, or not talk about, but think about every day. Because that actually that feels doable. So if it's only 10% of us who are starting to shift things, that's when the movement and the transition can start happening for real.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to note as well, that you are never, you may feel like a drop in the water, but what you do actually does spread rings, and it does create ripple effects. And we all have to eat the elephant in bites. And that's the only way to solve this challenge.
Yeah. Thank you for speaking to that. It's and what I'm also curious about, because we are talking about what like percentages and at a societal level, at least that's how I hear it, and also what happens at the individual level. I would like to, for a second, zoom into the business level and see, for example, within this big field of sustainability and climate change, we also deal with the leaders in businesses. And speaking of regenerative leadership, what I find really interesting is, how do you put this on a business agenda? For example, the circular economy is one of the topics that's related in this big field. And how do you create this type of circular economy in a business context? Do you have like models or programs or ways to incorporate circularity or regenerative things that businesses or business leaders can use?
Yeah, I think the way I work on it is maybe slightly different, because I never work with companies on implementing just a circular economy strategy. The circular economy is something that is getting more and more traction. And the reason is that that is the only way forward. Even if you, the same as if you are in the service industry or in the production industry, you need to transform to a circular economy. You need to design to disassembly. You need to make sure that every component used in the production can either be recycled or can biodegrade. And that is such a core pillar for future fit companies that needs to happen. And more organizations, at least in my part of the world, totally gets that and are embarking on that journey. And amazing things have happened just in the span of the last 4 or 5 years. But the way that I work with regenerative leadership, and also what we present, Giles Hutchins, my co-author and colleague, in our book Regenerative Leadership, is we call it the DNA of regenerative organizations, but it could also be the DNA of societies. And if you maybe show that model on your screen.
Sure, let me share this one.
Yes. So what we have here is the regenerative leadership DNA, and the reason that we have developed this model is to offer leaders a future fit approach to how to lead and organize organizations, something they could implement already today. The focus of this DNA is not just circular economy or biomimicry, where you are mimicking your products on the principles of nature, but it's a holistic model. Because what I have seen again and again is that then organizations, for example, starts to implement an SDG strategy. Now we want to deliver according to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or now we want to deliver on a circular economy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine and important, but we believe that we need a holistic approach, that we need an approach that is focusing both on the inner and the outer aspects of our employees, of our organizations, of our societies.
Right. Right.
And there's a whole story to how I got from working on climate change policy and sustainable technologies to now regenerative leadership.
Yeah.
But part of what I have experienced is that my field of sustainability pioneers and peers are so focused on climate change policies, on finance, on technologies, on the circular economy, on the SDGs, but they completely lack one of the critical components of a transformation to nourishing organizations and societies. That we need that dimension of inner self-care. We need to stand strong in ourselves. We need to understand how systems work,
Mm-hmm.
how everything we look at is interconnected networks within networks within networks, and that everything is influencing each other. What I fear a bit with the SDGs is that it becomes yet another siloed approach. And what we have so much of in the past is approaches that is focusing on silos.
Right. Could I just ask you, just for everyone who's watching, so what are the SDGs?
Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay, great.
So
Thanks.
they were agreed upon in 2015 and have succeeded creating a lot of awareness around sustainability. And many organizations are now on a transition to deliver strategies that are delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm slightly worried that unless we have another level of mindset, another level of consciousness to how we operate, that it will be yet another technology. I believe that we need to see ourselves as stewards of this planet, and that we need to start living according to the principles and logic of life. And what does that mean? It means
Mm-hmm.
that we need to shed the paradigm of the past that is working in hierarchies, in rigid silos, that is very much fear-based, highly competitive, in a way that is often destructive.
Yeah.
It is feeding our fear and our ego, and it's doing so much harm. And I believe
Mm.
everything is interconnected. I believe that the pollution that we see and the mass consumption that we see is because our level of consciousness is not of the level of the advanced human beings that we ought to be in terms of having the power and influence that we do have on this planet. We are consuming and producing like mad. And
Mm.
part of the reason we're doing that, I believe, is that we are stressed out of our minds. We are depressed. One of the biggest surveys on stress that Gallup issued last year, that interviewed 154,000 people from across 122 countries.
Mm-hmm.
The numbers from that is very depressing, and I cannot never forget the foreword of the project director of that study that just said, well, collectively we have never been more depressed, more sad, more worried, more anxious than we are today.
Yeah.
The amount of people that are on antidepressive medicine, yeah, I could go on. We are not healthy, and when we are not healthy, we cannot create healthy, thriving societies.
No, and
So,
that's circular as well. If we don't have healthy, thriving societies, we're not going to have
true,
more
true.
people who feel healthy and who are thriving. So,
Exactly. And it's the original circularity, I guess, as well. And also that awareness that we are in fact cyclical beings,
mm-hmm.
and every day needs an exciting full-on spring, the productive phase of summer, but we also need to let go and retreat and take breaks like we do in the winter time. But the concept of the circular economy does not really speak to that at all.
No.
So that's why we developed this leadership DNA, and it will be too comprehensive for me to talk you through everything, but just very briefly, it consists of 3 components,
Mhm.
which is living systems design. So how do we
Yeah.
design products and services? We use a circular economy. We use inspiration from nature. We use regenerative materials. How do we build thriving societies? Well, again, we can learn from nature. We can learn from psychology, anthropology, uh, sociology, in terms of how do we actually build societies and organizations that thrive.
Yeah.
One of the key components is, for example, diversity and inclusion. We need to be developmental and respectful. We need to be open to self-organizing, expansive structures instead of the very rigid hierarchical structures that is often feeding that fear and stress and ego that I talked to before. And
Hmm.
then the third component is, how can we be stewards of our planet with a high level of consciousness? How can we practice what we call living systems being? How can we practice presence? How can we practice coherence? And what we mean with coherence is that we all know how we feel when we feel good, when
Hmm.
when we feel aligned to our true soul mission and purpose. We are in coherence with who we truly are. When we don't have that coherence, we feel sad, miserable, and stressed. And many people feel like they are um, corporate robots that just have to deliver on Q1, Q2, Q3, etc. We
Yeah.
need to teach a mindset where we allow people to be who they truly are in their workplace in order
Right.
for us to create thriving organizations. We need to facilitate an abundance mindset instead of one of scarcity. And we need to practice silence. And I have become a big fan of silence.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
had
before we go there, because I know that there's a lot of things I want to ask you about that aspect and how that happened for you.
mhm,
But first, let me just summarize. So, what you're saying is that a circular economy and the approach to the circular economy may be like a reiteration or a recycling of more siloed ways of thinking still, and a solution that especially the SDGs that are approaches that need not necessarily create the circularity that we are looking for.
mhm,
And so you and Giles Hutchins developed this model,
mhm,
the living system design, the living systems culture, and the living systems being,
yeah,
to capture. Also, when I look at it, it's like capturing a new um, wave and a new space of where different elements can help
mhm,
move through the logic of life. That
yeah,
we can,
exactly.
whether we are at the individual or the organizational or the societal level,
Mhm,
that we can move alongside what we already see in nature and in
mhm,
healthy and thriving ecosystems. And
exactly.
so for example, if I'm a leader in business and you show me this model, what's your encouragement then? Because we may still have a tendency to approach it uh, in a way that doesn't support its actual introduction into an organization or in a larger context.
Mhm.
So
I
how
mean,
do
I, I,
you
I
how
guess,
do you do that?
I guess my experience from the world of business and business school did teach me to always go with the business case first.
Ah, okay.
Um, because there is a very, very strong business case behind regenerative leadership.
Hmm.
Um, Leaders of today in corporations or any organization, they have to deal with some of the things that I've already addressed: resource scarcity, climate change, the external landscape that are shifting all the time.
Yeah.
But they also have to deal with the inner landscape of their organizations. It's
Yeah.
it's a huge cost for them when their employees are away on sick leave because they are stressed. It's one of the biggest costs
Mm-hmm.
on the budgets of many European and American companies.
Yeah.
Um, so we need to address that, and we need to address that not with a little policy here, but with a new mindset that is viewing employees as a massive asset when we give them the conditions conducive to life, conditions conducive to thrive. When we pull away the stress and the fear mongering and the internal toxic competition, what then actually happens?
Yeah.
And thankfully, many organizations have worked on this for the past decades, some,
Mm-hmm.
or at least the past 5 or 10 years, and
Yeah.
they show amazing results in what actually happens when we allow for more flexible, resilient, self-organizing structure,
Yeah.
where we deeply value each employee, and when we have what we call a developmental and respectful culture, where we take it upon us to facilitate learning in the employee, instead of blaming them and pointing fingers and basically constantly thinking they are not doing their best because they are cheaters.
Yeah.
Changing the mindset around, you are all stewards of this amazing mission that we have in our company, and you are all important cells of this organism that we call our organization, and it's important to us that each cells in our organism is thriving. So what conditions do you need to thrive? Paying respect and attention to that, and then witnessing people actually flourishing. So that is immensely important to constantly put that argument first when we talk to leaders, that they get a massive return on investment when they courageously, because I do realize that it does require courage to
Mm-hmm.
completely change the mindset of the organization. And we have all been taught, I was taught the same in business school, even though I'm probably younger than most CEOs of big multinationals today, I
Mm-hmm.
was still taught the same fear-based mindset,
Yeah.
that it's about competing, it's about winning over your competitors, and I believe that we have competition all wrong, and we constantly reframe Darwin wrongly. He never really said survival of the fittest in terms of survival of the alpha hand that destroyed everyone else. No, what he meant, survival of the species that are able to best fit in. And in order to fit in, one of the most important competencies and qualities in species that have been around the longest are that of partnership and relationship, having that ability of creating value across your ecosystem
Yeah.
and making yourself of so much value that they can't live without you. And that positive mindset, that abundance mindset, is so important for future fit organizations, for regenerative organizations that wants to be here.
Yeah.
And it's also, I mean, it's full circle. It's also about, if you create the conditions for people to thrive, then you are a much more appealing company to work for,
Yeah.
and then the talent want to go work for you. And once you have the massive talent pool associated with you, associated with being an attractive company, that rips off to your ability to innovate, to be creative, to be a front runner in your market. So we very much, and I very much, teach that mindset of being an ecosystem facilitator
Yeah.
instead of a hierarchical dictator.
Right.
It's about facilitating and practicing that ability to sense into the systems and the systems within systems, but
Mm-hmm.
sensing into, okay, where in my, let's use an organization as an example, where in my organization do I see stagnated energy that I could help unleash?
Mm-hmm.
Where are the acupuncture points that I could help nourish to create more energy into vital nodes in my network?
Yeah.
Where are the keystone species those talents that just need the right conditions around them for them to show massive results.
Yeah.
So having that ability, instead of just having like a CEO that talks to his board of managers, but not actually knowing what goes on in the field, we need to open that model up. We need to, as leaders, we need to be on the floor. We need to have an attentive eye to what is actually going on, and we need emotional intelligence. We need social intelligence. We need to be able to see what actually is going on, instead of just having the ability to look at an Excel sheet.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for sharing so passionately about the regenerative leadership DNA and what it actually means when you look at living systems design, culture, and being, and what the logic of life looks like or could look like in an organizational context. And so what you're saying is having an understanding also of how systems are, what your own organizational system looks like, how you can open up the regenerative in your organization so people can thrive, and that requires something in your role as a leader also. I love how you speak so passionately about it, and I do know, and we briefly touched upon it, and I'd like to go there now, is that this is not just something you're saying from your activism in the very early stages, your own role as a leader, or what you've done in the business context, but also something happened to you, and it's related to silence.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah. Or no, I would I would love to hear that with you. So when my daughter, my firstborn, was 2 years old, I was heading Sustainia. I was the CEO of Sustainia, traveling a lot, working a lot, trying to navigate how I could make room for my passion, and that dedication that I had had since I was a kid of wanting to help our societies on a sustainable transition, while also being a new young mom and trying to make room for everything. And looking back, it was an incredibly hectic time, that from one day to the other stopped because I had a traumatic brain injury. So I went from working full speed to not being able to do anything. I had a trauma to my head that maybe, had I not been so stressed and had I not been so depleted myself, maybe I would have been able to regain my strength and regenerate within a couple of weeks. But my whole body was just in such a poor state when this injury happened, because I had not regenerated myself. I had not taken care of myself. Every area of my life, I worked full speed head on, never took time out to just restore myself. So when that injury happened, it was like when you drop a hard drive that is turned on. It was just like then everything went black.
Yeah.
I couldn't do anything.
Wow.
I couldn't cope with anything. I couldn't read or write or listen to anything. Any input was just so traumatic that for the first many months, I just slept in a dark room, more or less. Spent intervals 10 minutes with my daughter, and then I had to retreat and sleep. So it was another nightmare. And no doctor could tell me when and if I would ever heal again.
Yeah.
So that was a long journey. And in the beginning, and I don't mean just the first few days, but in the first many months, I tried stupidly to apply my project management skills on my brain injury healing, which is not possible. So I was like, I don't believe there's not a cure for this. There has to be a cure. So I did a lot of research, which was making my injury even worse. Trying to put together a team of doctors that could heal me.
Yeah.
But this kind of injury can only be healed from the inside out, and by allowing the brain to do its job,
Yeah.
not by giving it more input.
No.
So I kept having small mini breakdowns because my body simply could not cope with this. And this was in the year 2015. And in the beginning of our conversation, I talked about how passionate I was for the COP15 in 2009,
Mm-hmm.
which ended up in in a miserable failure. And in 2015 was the point in time where international society was like, well, we have to do it again. So they
Yeah.
met in Paris for the COP21.
Yeah.
And my organization had a lot of events in December 2015. And my injury happened in July 2015.
Yeah.
So I was fighting like a mad person to get well enough to go to Paris.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't even pick up my daughter in daycare or go grocery shopping. So I started to realize that that was utter insanity of me. So I guess 3 weeks before the COP21 started,
Mm-hmm.
instead of booking plane tickets, I booked a silence retreat
Mm-hmm.
and took a deep sigh and realized that I had to go about this in a completely different way.
Yeah.
So went to the forest, went to silence, and that became a long inner journey
Yeah.
that lasted a few years of silence, a lot of meditation, a lot of looking deep into my inner demons,
Mm.
which we all have, but most of us don't really dare go there. But I had to go there for me to heal. And then I started to realize that this was part of the journey that I needed to go through. And I started to see many cracks of light in that journey,
Mm-hmm.
and started to make my mini breakdown and breakthrough sort of like a micro version of what needs to happen on a society collective scale as well.
Yeah.
And what could I then learn from that?
Mm.
I
Mm.
also retreated a lot to nature, and that kind of reconnected me with my big love of nature that I had since I was a kid. That's how it all started. My sadness of destroying trees and my love of forest. And then I started to realize that even though I have worked as a professional in the field of climate change and sustainability my entire life,
Yeah.
I know nothing about how nature works. So that became the beginning of my journey of studying nature's systems,
Yeah.
living systems.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been the journey that I've been on for the past intensely 3 years, since I started to regain my abilities to read and write and listen. I have just kind of, I stayed below the radar to study and read and write and kind of get my head around this, because there's this we need something more holistic. We can't make the same mistake of falling in love with a silo because for example climate change policy, because we believe that's what needs to change. If our society as a whole is not complete, if we succeed on lowering carbon emission, let's just use that as an
Mm-hmm.
example, as a society,
Yeah.
what is it worth if we're still miserable, and if we still have pollution everywhere, if our oceans are still filled with plastic? Things goes together, and we need to realize that we can all create the ripple effects upon ecosystems that regain their vitality, but that the most important ecosystem is the one we have in here.
Yeah.
And if that ecosystem is not thriving, our ability to create real lasting regenerative change is next to none.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So almost needless to sum it up, but I'm going to try anyway. And that is that through your own experience, you realized my body, my own ecosystem is shutting me down because I've been working on sustainability in the outer world, but not
Yeah,
in the inner world. And
exactly.
you were pulled back in to actually go and look at what your own system needs, but also what is nature actually all about.
Yeah.
and when is it regenerative and when is it not? And what's the point of trying to put all kinds of things on the sustainability agenda or making sustainability goals in your organization if the inner work has not been done? It's not about um, window dressing and showing on the outside world, oh, look at how sustainable we're trying to be. But it's actually going to that regenerative leadership DNA on the inside of
Mm.
yourself as a leader and of your organization so that you can truly work from the inside out on sustainability, on the regenerative, and create really healthy and strong, thriving, living human systems at all levels. Did I get that right?
Yes, sounds beautiful when you say it like that.
So, Laura, we've almost come to the end of our conversation, and there's one more question I would like to ask you, and that is a question for everyone who is watching. So we learned from you the importance of the inner work also in the regenerative leadership approach and DNA and idea. What are some of the first things that you would recommend that people who are watching can do if they want to do the work on the inside?
On the inside only.
No, the outside is fine. We looked at things like that, so
Mm.
you can add those.
I think I would come with this. I would recommend two things
Yeah.
on an individual and organizational level. But on an individual level, I mean, see yourself first and foremost as an inner ecosystem where
Hmm.
everything inside of you needs your attention and love and care to function as best as possible.
Yeah.
And for that, for you to thrive, you need time where you retreat and explore your inner world. Most people today have no idea what their purpose is. Do I even have one? Many people have no idea how it feels to be aligned with your true purpose in life.
Hmm.
And if that is the case, that requires some time.
Hmm.
What excites you? What lifts you up? Where we all know what it feels like to feel good and to be excited about a person we meet, a topic we come across. So start this fascinating, fun, explorative journey of your inner world. What lights you up?
Mm.
And for to have that mindset, we do need some time in silence by ourselves, so we don't have that input all the time,
Yeah.
but that we just have that stillness, so our inner world can actually have the space it needs to talk to us. So
Yeah.
that is one thing.
Hmm.
And on an organizational level, I would encourage, of course, everyone to do what I just said, but also leaders of all walks of life. We need to see ourselves as ecosystem facilitators.
Hmm.
We need to see that everything we do, from the smile we pass to a stranger on the street, to the groceries we buy, to the clothes we wear, to everything, creates massive ripple effects
Yeah.
across systems and systems. Where does this come from? Where does my food come from? Has there been used pesticides that is making it impossible for insects to thrive to produce what I'm currently eating? To practice this mindset that how I treat everything in life creates massive negative and degenerative ripple effects, or positive and regenerative ripple effects.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how can you create positive regenerative ripple effects?
Yeah. Well, what to say about that? I know what lights me up, and that has to do with conversations like these, and hopefully the ripple effect of our conversation today, Laura, is just as huge as what I believe what you've shared from your journey today. We've been talking about regenerative leadership, about the regenerative leadership DNA, and how what it takes to actually put sustainability, climate change, and everything related on the agenda in a different way that doesn't take away from our comfortable lives, but actually
Mm.
sets a new standard of quality of life. And that's the only viable way to go. We talked about the inner work, we talked about the work in organizations, and especially we also heard about you and how you model regenerative leadership in your life. Thank you so much, Laura, for being here in conversation.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. This has been a pleasure. Thank you.
And to everyone who's been watching, if you want to share more about your possibilities for your inner work and ecosystem or outer work in your organization, then please continue the conversation in our online community space. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye bye.